in meetings, the meeting's being recorded. In meetings at Masa lately, we've recognized an urgent need for fellows and alum to get good information in a safe, welcoming space with experts who can provide it, and also a bit of time for asking questions, difficult questions, questions that we can all ask each other as a Masa community and as Masa fellows. So my name is Amy Weinreb. I'm the Chief Executive Director of the Masa Leadership and Impact Center, which does education and leadership for all of the Masa programs. And one of the things that we're working on together right now is making sure that we stay connected, even when we're not in the same place. And I suspect that there are people who are Zooming in tonight from Israel and from all over the world. A little bit earlier, I asked if people could just drop in the chat. And this is an important piece of data for us to get a sense, because this is part of putting our finger on the pulse of where our Masa community is. Just type in where you are right now in the chat, where in the world you are. Netherlands, amazing. And if you're a Masa fellow or alum, because one of the things that we want to know is who is craving education and information right now, and what are the many platforms we can provide it. This is a bit of an experiment. With the help of Benji Davis, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, we put this together pretty quickly because of the urgent need. And this is actually the start of a 6-part series, but we're just going to focus on right here and right now. And I'm really, really happy that Benji is taking the lead on this. Benji is a colleague and friend of mine. He's a very experienced educator, speaker, and researcher, specializing in Israel education, which is an increasingly important field. He's the founding director of Impact, Reimagine Israel Education, that looks at bringing Jews together in a big tent, people who care about Israel but might have different opinions or coming at it from different angles, who can still get together and talk and learn together. He's also a published author. He has an MA in Jewish education from the Hebrew University, and he's originally from LA. I don't know if we have anyone here from LA. He made Aliyah in 2009 and lives in Jerusalem most of the time, with his wife, Rachel, and his 3 daughters. Benji, is there anything else you would add about yourself?
I'll just take you around whenever I need an introduction.
You can
I'm feeling
ask
low
me
in the
anytime.
self-esteem space. Make me feel good.
Benji, before you get started, I want to say one more thing. While Benji's talking, he's going to talk for about 20 minutes. When questions or comments come into your mind, I really want you to write them in the chat. I want it while it's fresh. It's for you to remember your questions and to try articulating them. And it's also so we see what some of the needs and interests are. But the majority of our webinar is actually going to be Q&A, and we'll start there. Some people have emailed questions in advance. Some of them are quite complex. And then we'll have the ordinary, press the icon for your little yellow hand. And I want to take a moment to also introduce Andrew. Andrew Dittis is on my team at the MLIC. He's our alum and community manager. He has a really important job during this season of Israel's life, keeping people together. And then I see a few other Masa affiliates and educators. I see Amy, Caleb, and Shai, and Sigal. If you could just raise your hand, and if there's somebody I missed, let me know. And one of the reasons I'm pointing this group out is because during the Q&A, Benji's going to answer, but I also think it's really healthy to have diverse voices when we're addressing questions. So I'm going to welcome anyone on the team to share their perspectives or expertise or experience. Now, Benji, I'm almost done with this introduction. The last thing I was going to say is that at the end of the official webinar, at the hour point, when we say goodbye, We'll stop recording, but I'm going to stay on, and anybody else is welcome to stay on for 20 minutes of informal conversation. It could be worries, concerns, fears, questions, what you need right now, what types of education you feel you're missing. And I'll hang out in the room until we're done. So that's an important element, because it's not only presenting in Q&A, it's also being there for you in that informal space. So I will shut up and hand it over to Benji.
Hey everyone. Whoever's comfortable. I'm not the biggest fan of like speaking and teaching on Zoom, but when I'm in person, no one can like put something on their face, so I can't see them. So if it would be possible for people to turn on their cameras, I'm not forcing anyone to do anything, and you chose to be your own volition, and you can also choose to leave whenever you want. However,
I would love cameras on, even if just for a few minutes. And this is really kind of maybe promotional, but I would love when as many cameras are on for just a couple of minutes to take a photo of us all together, just to say we're here, not black boxes, but we're actually here. So let's do 1, 2, 3 cameras on, and then you can choose if you need to or want to turn them off. Okay, cameras on for a minute. Hi. Oh, Moshe's here. Thank you so much for turning cameras on. This looks nice, and it's interesting to see faces. Okay. We got cameras, most cameras. All right. Andrew, do you want to take a picture of all these beautiful faces? And okay, thanks, Benji. Thanks for mentioning that.
all right. Hi everyone. My name is Benji. October 7th, I guess is when we'll start the story. I live in Jerusalem, and it was Simchat Torah and Shabbat. And my family, right, we keep Shabbat. Sometimes we go to synagogue or shul. Most times we don't, to be honest. We just kind of hang out. But I was like, today I'm gonna suit it up. Like I never wear a suit. No, everyone's been in Israel. Who wears a suit in Israel? I'm like, today I'm gonna wear a suit. 8 a.m. Put on a suit. Start to have Cheerios with my kids. I have a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-month-old. And then I tell my wife, I think I hear a siren. And our baby was sleeping in the mamad in the shelter room, like having a nap. So we all run. And the biggest concern at 8 a.m. on October 7th for me was actually don't wake up the baby, right? And we kept kind of running in and out, and it all felt really weird. And Rachel and I, my wife, didn't turn on our phones. We decided we're going to stick to our plans, go to our friends for lunch, maybe pop into school for the end. We have to run back into our apartment building, right, for another siren. And our rationale was, we'll just be able to run into buildings if there's another siren. We'll do the 20-minute walk. Crazy to be Israeli. And I ran into a couple of friends. I actually ran into Gali Gordon, one of the people who was a former Masa employee, who kind of told me what was happening. And then another friend, I saw the look of death on his face. And that's when I kind of knew everything was changing. And 3 weeks later, everything has changed. We are living through some serious paradigm shifts, and some people, I think, are still clinging to a pre-October 7th reality, while others understand they're in a post-October 7th reality. And a part of the challenge of what we've identified here of like navigating the noise of this current moment, I would say, is there are currently those that are on the farther ends of the spectrums in terms of fundamentalist, extremists. More people could be sucked into their ideologies and way of life, which tends to then alienate us, Jews, Zionists, Israelis, and etc. And there's not much, right, we're going to do about that. And that hasn't particularly changed. And unfortunately, it's being amplified, right? And a lot of those people are basing their ideologies on what I would call, and especially with to do the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, an epistemological fallacy, a failure to understand what is actually facts, knowledge, empirical evidence, and kind of rooting their opinions and identities based on clear falsehood, right? So one way to kind of navigate that noise and bring in clarity is we can really try to bring truth to those falsehoods, if you want to say. What is simple versus what is complex. So that the question, though, is once you do that, though, will the fundamentalists on either side probably will not budge. So the question is for us as, I don't know, you would call us human beings that see humanity in human beings. Maybe, I don't know. Is that the moderate center now in the world? Soon find out. But trying the way to navigate the noise is trying to differentiate between things that are rooted in empirical knowledge and things that are not. And that's step one. Step two is for some people that may be in our space of, okay, I agree. I can actually form opinions based on facts and knowledge, critical analytical abilities, while seeing the identity of human beings and have empathy for the human experience. Are they still stuck to an October 6th way of looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Right? Because those are folks where you can navigate the noise, right? And not that we really understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict post October 7th. That is still going to be complicated and complex. No one here is going to solve that conflict. Palestinian national identity is still going to exist, no matter if we uproot Hamas and how we uproot Hamas. Israeli political identity and their feelings towards Palestinians are going to be very real and potent, and Israelis will be more against the Palestinian state than they ever were before, and how to deal with two national groups living on the same land. That complexity will not change. But some people are leaning into that complexity to try and mansplain what has happened in October 7th and try and emphasize the importance of what Israel is doing to Gaza, as opposed to the responsibility of Hamas, and starting this with the greatest massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. But it's not even at it. It's really the first mass mobilization of terrorists to cross a border and kill people at such scale and such gruesome qualitative way that we've ever seen before in, I don't know, contemporary life in modernity. But yet it seems so many are focusing on the innocents dying in Gaza. And our challenge as Zionists and Israelis is I hope we all have empathy for the innocents that are dying there. But if we can use our brains and not lean into epistemological fallacies and falsehoods, but rather, but why is that the case and who is responsible for it? And will people be able to listen to that? And so can we hold, I don't know if it's three things or not, but one is the legitimacy of Jewish people to be humans, be Zionists, for Israelis to be who they are, and for us not to have a fear to live in our homes, and terrorists won't bulldoze a border and come into our homes. Like, Israelis need that to be answered. All of us, all Israelis need that security for that very that fear that we all have. Two, Palestinians are still a group of people with a national claim to a territory that they call their own, and they're not going to go away, right? And we cannot delegitimize their humanity as well. And if you are for their cause, and it's not that I'm against their cause per se. I'm pro-Palestinians having humanity and having something for their own. And I'm a liberal nationalist, right? I believe in liberal rights for all, liberal rights for national groups, and I'm a Zionist, so that's how I identify my Zionism, not left to right, but liberty, nationalism. Palestinians have a right to do the same thing. But can we hold that Hamas is a genocidal jihadist that is responsible for the massacre of our people and their own people? Right? So how can we hold these three things, who these main groups are, and therefore this isn't the Israeli-Palestinian conflict of conflicting narratives, and we say occupation and they don't. It's independence versus Nakba. In terms of understanding this moment, that is not this. It is not occupation. It is not the buzzwords that you hear of the progressive or the far left. This is between humanity and civilization, and those believe in an enlightened liberal world order, and those that want an Islamic caliphate and want to genocide other groups, most specifically the Jews at this point, but not exclusively the Jews, for their utopian vision. And what's really tragic right now is what we're seeing across social media is either the fundamentalists that are just being anti-Semitic and dumb and stupid and awful, or those that are clinging to a pre-October 7th reality and calling for a ceasefire, thinking that this can just be how it was before. And it's not that I'm a military strategist or even a geopolitical expert, although I'm happy for people to pay me to think that I'm a geopolitical expert, right? But as in, whoever has a solution, I don't know who does. I don't know if we know, like, can Israel actually militarily achieve its objectives? Right? I don't have the answer for that. I hope we can. I really think we need to have that. but all I know is it's changed. The world has changed. Israel's changed. The Middle East has changed, and the Jewish world. And we don't know what it's going to look like moving forward. And for those clinging to October 6th and before, of the tit and the tat, is that how you say it? I don't know if I said that right. I'm sorry, I was big. Right, the the taunt in a way between Israel and Hamas. It's not going to happen. And the variable in terms of what's happening with this war that I haven't explained now, but it may be the cause of our times as Jews from around the world are not Israeli-born Jews or Jews that, for the most part, don't live in Israel full time, are the hostages, right? And how it's like, I know Ben Gurion said this, and I don't know if this is the right way. And I'd love also, this is a great thing also for Kalev, my colleague, to chime in on, is like, he said something about fight the white paper. Like, you got to fight the British, like there's no white paper, and vice versa. I'm like, Kalev, what's the exact quote?
It was connected to fighting the Second World War. We're gonna
Yeah,
support the British in the Second World War as if there was no white paper, and we're gonna fight the white paper, which limited Jewish immigration to Palestine, as if there was no World War.
Right, exactly. So that's the challenge that it seems that the Israeli government and military echelon and security are dealing with, which is, can we fight the wars if there's no hostages, and can we deal with the hostages if there's no? Right, there's 200 and seems at least 228 Israelis or non-Israelis. Most of them are citizens. Most are Jewish. Some are, I think, foreign workers that were taken and kidnapped. Children, adults, elderly, disabled, Holocaust survivors, etc. They need to come home, and it needs to be super fast. Well, on the other hand, us Israelis, I don't think it's just us Israelis. I think it's the enlightened liberal order needs to obliterate any ability of a group like Hamas to storm a border and do what it did. So that's why I go back to the title here and how to have clarity in the situation. I'll say these are my main points, and then let's get to the Q&A. One is, it is not October 6th and before. This is not, I've said it already, this is not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's part of it, but we are living in a much simpler paradigm. It is, I don't want to be like George Bush said it right in 2002. There's like, what do you call it, the axis of evil or something? But it really is. This is an axis of evil. Hamas is a part of allies that starts with Iran. And what did former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said? There's the octopus. There's Iran. There's Hezbollah, Hamas. There's the Houthis in Yemen. There's other groups in Iraq and Syria, right there. And it's supported perhaps by the Russians. It is an evil order that is trying to uproot our way of life, and we are at the front lines of it. And the people living in Otef Aza and the Gaza border region, we're at the front part of the periphery, not of Israel, but of human civilization. And the both sidism when it came to that hospital blast that was caused by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the both sidism you see in the media, the focus almost solely in a lot of places on what Israel is doing to defend itself, and not contextualizing the human tragedy of Gazans, the inability to differentiate, or the inability rather to contextualize Gazans may need fuel, but that fuel, but Hamas is holding on to 500 something thousand tons of fuel. I don't know if I got that right, but that's what Elon, my friend, who's government spokesman now, he said the other day, and I saw him, right? That Hamas needs the fuel for how are they launching rockets? They have fuel, right? How are there lights in the tunnels? They have fuel. How do they have power for themselves? They have the fuel, right? So on the one hand, it's simple. Israel needs to be able to defend itself. That's very clear. What's complex and not so simple is, how do we fight this war? And how can, under the law, right, international law or values, and I don't have the answer. That's complex, right? Is in how can we be empathetic for the Palestinian situation? Okay, so that's one thing I think really needs to be clarified. This is not the same Palestinian-Israeli conflict that we have. Second one, have not mentioned it, but it is the roots of, there's an allyship between Islamic fundamentalists and the far left that you are seeing on social media, and it allows Hamas not just to use human shields, which it is currently doing, but it is an intellectual shield. Because people can say we are apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genociding, right? And Hamas can then use that language, right, which then delegitimizes the idea of Israel and the idea of the Jewish people to be who they are, right? And this allyship is rooted in the same fallacy that the Jewish people are settler colonialists, that they're just white and they're just a whatever religion from Europe and they don't belong here. And that fallacy enables Hamas, just as it enables far left pro-Palestinian anti-Semitic activists to think that justice is on their side. And the genocidal massacre of Hamas, or the violence you're seeing, or what you're seeing on social media from the anti-Semitic far left or even far right, is rooted in this same notion that Jewish people are not rooted in the land of Israel, and they are settler colonialists representing something that is not from here. And at least for Hamas and their methods, and it could be also the activists on the whatever political spectrum they are, through enough alienation or enough violence and massacring the Jewish people will end up going somewhere else. That's what happened to the French in Algeria, America in Afghanistan, other colonial instances. And that's how you can have both Hamas and progressive or Marxist or whatever you want to call them, academics all around North America and the enlightened West essentially agreeing with each other. You have crazy fundamentalist Islamists and supposedly enlightened progressives. They agree on this same thing, and their ideology is rooted in the same epistemological fallacy, in the same falsehood. Jewish people are not from the land of Israel, and it needs to be colonized. And it is legitimate to use violent means to get them out of there. If you talk to someone that believes that, you will not, as in that is, so then the question of how you have a conversation that still someone that believes in that, but at least we can have the clarity of understanding where they are coming from. A lot of the pro-Palestinian activism is not rooted in my national liberalism of seeing two peoples with the rights to have self-determination of self and for all individuals to have the same rights, and two people should have their own home, and I shouldn't be able to threaten them. They shouldn't threaten me. And I don't know what it looks like. I don't know if a two-state solution is possible, but I know Palestinians are human beings, and right, they have the legitimacy to be who they are and have their own identity. And that's where I could say I'm pro-Palestinian in a way. Unfortunately, what pro-Palestinian usually means is being anti-Jewish. And the Jews don't have a right to being here. So the two main things in terms of navigating the noise. This is not the same conflict that it was on October 6th. This is much more of a good versus evil, or this is really a part of a utopian vision of taking over the world on one group, and we're on the defenses of human civilization. The second one, and what you can see both in terms of coverage of this, is on both fronts, social media, regular media, and the conversations. Are we talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how it was, or are we dealing with the new paradigm? Or secondly, are we dealing with part one or A in terms of, are the Jews just a religion? Are the Jews settler colonialists? Does this land just belong to the Palestinians? Is this massacre just a methodology of decolonization? If people are using those words, it behooves us to, if they're willing to be in conversation with us, to then actually be in conversation on how that is a fallacy and a falsehood and an either misunderstanding or pure ignorance and understanding who we are as Jewish people. The third thing I want to say, and then I'm going to finish my remarks, is how to be dealing with those that, or what we can do as a community for those that will not listen, trying to clarify either this isn't the same Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or you don't understand who we are as the Jews, or your pro-Palestinianism is rooted in a falsehood, but I'm still pro-Palestinians being human beings, and this is how, because we're both groups of people with rights to something of our own. We have to ally and come together and maybe build new institutions as Jewish people if the institutions that we are a part of are no longer working. If Brandeis Student Union will not condemn Hamas, then there needs to be a new Brandeis. Now I know Barry Weiss, if you'll follow her, she's like helped set up a new university or I don't know what, and maybe that's too ambitious. And I can't say we need new Brandeis's, but it means that Jewish people need to come together. And we're seeing it with the project of Zionism is the model. So if we can't live in Israel, we're not going to join the Jews in Israel. And I'm not saying one should. I'm actually not even in Israel right now. I'm going back in 2 weeks. I'm here in Toronto with my family. But the model of Zionism is you come together, right, to do it for yourself. And I think Ahad Ha'am had this really interesting idea of, right, cultural Zionism, and can cultural Zionism exist outside the land of Israel? That's something to be debated. But I think the new paradigm shift, and we can predict what Israeli politics will be like moving forward, Israel's geopolitical strategy, the Abraham Accords, what will happen with our neighbors, the Middle East. But what's really interesting, I think, for this group is the paradigm shift that's going to happen in the Jewish world, where we're going to see so many more Jews opt into being a part of the Jewish community, because not because they chose it, because they're being forced. And what are we going to do to combat the fact that they're being forced to now join our community? What are we going to do? Or so many of us are feeling alienated, experiencing anti-Semitism, and feel like the institutions that we were a part of and the identities that we had as Americans, as whatever, Canadians or Europeans or wherever we're living. We have power that we've never had before. And that's the difference between this massacre and any other Jewish massacre. The power that we have in the state of Israel and the power we have outside of the state of Israel, and the ability for us to organize for ourselves. And we realize that we have what to do. So I hope these three main points can help us a little bit in terms of navigating the noise, in terms of this isn't the same conflict. Let's try and understand who the main protagonists and who the groups are, right? Jews, Israelis, Palestinians, Hamas versus human civilization, right? And where we're playing a part of that. And then the three, in terms of what can we be doing as a community to come together to combat this, that there is this new paradigm of Jewishness outside of Israel, and to embrace it. Those are my opening remarks, and I'm happy to take questions.
Benji, thank you. I already feel like there's a little bit less noise in my head, but it's not easy. And some of the things that came up for me, I wrote in the chat. But Andrew, do you want to start by reading aloud a couple of the questions that came up in the chat? Some are related to each other. We do have an emailed set of questions that came in, and let's say after about 10 minutes or so, I want people to be able to raise their hands and have it be more interactive, or if you want to respond to something, we'll be sensitive to that too.
Can I just, the first question here I think is important. I want to answer. Don't you think that a ceasefire could be good for diplomacy? Is it necessary to keep killing children? Do you really feel to kill them all to be safe? I hope we don't have to kill anyone to be safe. The goal is not to kill children. The goal is to eradicate Hamas's military capabilities. And there maybe is an ethical question that could come up. Well, if you have a terrorist group fighting within an urban domain, is Israel, what is Israel supposed to do? Right? So currently Israel is doing bombing from the skies. We don't actually know the actual ratio of this war in terms of how many combatants versus innocents are dying, because we cannot trust Hamas with the numbers. But typically in the Israeli wars with Gaza, it's been about 1-to-1, as in for every combatant, usually an innocent civilian is dying, which is actually, once again, we should be empathetic for the tragedy of every innocent that's lost. But if you want to be kind of more studying this as an observer perspective, in the usually in the American arenas in Iraq and Afghanistan and other Western countries fighting in asymmetrical warfare, it gets to numbers of, and Kalev can also comment on this, but I've seen as high as 1-to-7 combatants versus innocents. There's no way around it. So for some people, okay, so if one innocent's dying, then there should just be a ceasefire. The problem is for those advocating that there should just be a ceasefire because then less innocents will die. 1,400 Israelis were murdered in a couple hours that were in their homes. And you have a whole state of about 10 million people. If they fear that that could happen again, then what's not ethical is that this is the existential state of the state of Israel will continually no longer be able to exist unless this is addressed. So if anyone has a better way to eradicate Hamas, I mean, I guess what Hamas could essentially do is give back all the kidnapped people and their anti-Semitism and their terror war on Israel, and to decide to become liberal Democrats, and then there would no longer be fighting in Gaza. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So they have forced the Israelis, unfortunately, to at least for now, do what they're doing, and they're killing their own people as a result of it, and not the Israelis. And I really hope that we Israelis can get more support for our efforts, not to hurt Gazans, but we're actually defending ourselves and our state and the future of the Jewish people.
Benji, I think a problem with the word ceasefire, and this is something I wrote to May in the chat. I mean, to a lot of people, it sounds so logical and rational, not in terms of military strategy, but of course you would stop fighting. And it seems unimaginable that people would, on the liberal left or pacifists, would say that that a ceasefire is never a good thing. I think there's an idea that a ceasefire is always the humanitarian thing to do. And you answered this, but if somebody says, I can't believe you don't want a ceasefire, in a sentence, what would you say in response?
I want war to end, but I don't want a ceasefire if it means I'll be less safe and I'll fear for the lives of my children. Okay. So we need to solve this, and unfortunately, it looks like the military solution is the way to go. And war is awful. But would we want, the liberal order happened because of World War II and the devastation that was caused as a result of it. I'm not trying to make comparisons here, but rather sometimes the only way to solve issues is not, you can't do diplomacy. And if you try and you try and you try, and then it's about power dynamics, the question I have for those folks is, who do you want to have more power, Israel or Israel's enemies? And the consequences of Israel's enemies having more power are not good for anyone in this room, or really anyone that identifies as progressive, to be perfectly honest.
And I think too, with the term ceasefire, one sort of powerful response that I've heard is, whose advantage would who would have the advantage with the ceasefire? And the fairly clear strategic answer is Hamas. Hamas would benefit from a ceasefire.
If we have a ceasefire now, they've won. But I understand why there hasn't been a ground incursion if it means we can get more hostages. And I would not, if there's a way to get all the hostages out and wait on the ground incursion, that's a really hard thing to give an opinion on, but I want the hostages home. And I want Hamas eradicated, and that's where Israelis are at.
Andrew, do you want to select another question that's not mine?
Sure, I'll read one from the email.
Sure.
So someone asked, who is leading Israel right now? Why are the country's leaders not more present and engaged with the Israeli people? Do you see any prospect of leaders who can raise morale and explain Israel's cause?
Kalev, I don't know if you want to take that one, but I know what you'll say.
I also don't know if I want to take it. Would you like me to take it, Benji?
I'll take it, and then you can add in if you want.
Go for it.
Maybe Kalev will be a little more cynical than I am. But I'll say it like this: Israeli society feels rudderless from its government, and what you can be inspired by this moment is how much the Israeli people have mobilized to lead our efforts, both in terms of civic society engaged initiatives, both in terms of when the kidnappings happen to try and actually find them and using all our cybersecurity, in terms of the volunteering initiatives that are happening around the country where it feels like there's just too much going on and where can I even contribute? Because everyone's volunteering. The over 100% mobilization of the reserves, and lots of our friends are on the northern border and southern border just kind of waiting or actually actively fighting, both Hezbollah and Hamas. We can be really inspired by that and the mobilization of the Jewish communities all around the world, that we don't need to be frustrated on the future leadership of the Jewish people because we're seeing it happen in our own eyes organically. And the failure of our political leadership, we're seeing it right out in the open. And why it's happening goes into a much deeper political analysis. In terms of what I would say is, I'm trying not to get into left or right or who's right and who's wrong here. But I think what we are seeing in terms of needing of leadership is talent, skills, and professionalism and respect for the job. and right, and it doesn't mean you right wing can be not there and left wing can be not there. But what happened, I think, with this Israeli government in the last year, and what you're fully seeing now, is a lack of the professionalism and a respect for the jobs and the roles that they have, coupled with, and so that leads to like certain appointments of people that were supposed to be professionals and civil servants that weren't given those jobs, right? So then people aren't receiving the services that they received. But then also with the political moment of the divisions of the country that kept going and going with the judicial reform, whether you supported them or not, whether they were good for Israel or not, I'm not getting into, but rather the perception of the divisions and the weakness of Israeli society from our enemies, for them prove their epistemological fallacy that with enough violence and if they massacre us, we will get up and all Israelis will just leave and they can decolonize us. And the lack of respect for what this was doing to our geopolitical position before October 6th, and then this happened, I think, and then you're now seeing that coupled with saying, well, why don't we have the leaders? Why aren't they this? I think most Israelis, the lack of respect for this government now on all sides based on polling is get the hell out of my face. The military people run the war, but the random ministers that aren't really involved in the effort, they get spit on when they go and visit people in the hospital or the hostages rooms and things like that. And it's also Likud, classical Likud voting places feel betrayed, right? And so one of the paradigm shifts that's going to happen, and we don't know now exactly where it is. I have my predictions. I've talked about Kalev a little bit. We've shared it. Right, the country is going to change politically forever because of this moment. The 5 years abyss that we've been in with the no BB, yes BB, is all going to change. There will be new political actors. People will never be forgiven for what happened. They will be leaving. We'll have new political parties, and we're going to have new leadership, and our leaders know it. So why you have leaders in Israel, it may not be from the political echelon that we're used to, and we are being led by amazing leaders in civic society and many commanders throughout the army. Even if some of the higher level people failed us and are continuing to fail us, I have full confidence in the Israeli people and the Jewish people, and I think it's amazing.
Olive, you had something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with the vast majority of what Benji said, both now and before. I think the paradigm has changed, not just militarily security, but also politically. And what was before will not be again. But we're 3 weeks in. We don't quite know how things are going to change. I do think similar to, and I think comparisons are useful until they're not. Okay, but similar to after the 1973 Yom Kippur War, where Labour basically, which had been in power for, I guess, almost 30 years, was thrown out. I find it difficult to imagine anyone who's in any sort of senior political position pre-October the 7th will ultimately stay in power. I may be wrong. I may be surprised. But and I think they are now embarrassed to turn up at these places because they know what's coming. But as Benji said, and I think this is a super important point, where top down has failed, the bottom up civil society has really risen to fill that vacuum. And so if we define leadership as people in positions of authority, then we may be very disappointed. But if we define leadership as people who have taken on initiative to fill, to help house people, to give them food, to give them clothing, to organize things, then actually, if we define that as leadership, not from those who are elected, not for those who are in authority positions, but those of whom come from bottom up, then actually we can be very proud of what's happened. And just one other thing that I'd touch on that Benji said, unfortunately, tragically, we have this convergence of a government that made appointments based on populist decisions or who they happen to be close to, coupled with the biggest disaster we've had in the last 75 years. And it's very clear that the government is not able to, again, some of the director generals who are professionals are trying to do things, but the people above them don't really have a clue. And we are we are suffering from that as well. But if we want to, again, if we want to put a positive spin on things, how civil society has risen to the occasion, I think is really inspiring. And it remains to be seen how the kind of how the cards will fall. But when all of this is over, it's unclear when it will be. When all of this is over, we are going to be in a very, very different place politically as well.
This is what I wanted. This
Sure,
is what I
go
want to
ahead.
do now, Andrew. Just I want to. There's an important question from Marissa, and it's turning a little bit away from the local Israeli reality and political reality, and thinking about how this leaks onto U.S. space specifically. And I'm gonna read that aloud, and then I'm gonna ask people who have questions either in the chat or before or now to raise their hands instead. I want to hear your voices and see your faces a little bit and get more of a sense of who's in the room. But I'm reading Marissa's question right now. So she says, I work in the DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion space in US government. How do I hold my programs to the fire regarding including Jews in their DEI education and recruitment? And this is harder than ever at this moment, I think, after this war. So thank you for that, Marissa. I could have had you also read it aloud, but I'd be curious what Benji and the other educators have to say to that.
It goes into the challenge both for Jews themselves and for people who are not Jewish. It is the question that contemporary or modern society has tried to figure out for a long time, which is the Jewish question, which are, who the hell are you, you Jews? What are you? I don't get you. You say you have another homeland, but you want to politically integrate into society. You have another language, but you don't actually speak it. Your religion rejects who actually is the son of God, but he was a part of your people. Like, as in, there's a lot of complication, and then that's for the outsiders, and for the insiders, Jews are like, especially outside of Israel. Wait, so being Jewish is just my religion, but I'm actually American or Dutch or Canadian. Like, that's my national identity, right? And Jewishness is just a religion, and I just do in the privacy of my own home. For most Jews that live in North America, they are Ashkenazi and white passing and may identify as part of the white racial majority in America, and may not feel as a minority and felt politically, socially, and culturally and economically integrated into society. And American Jews and North American Jews, and let's say in some other Western countries, Jews have fully reached the highest levels of power, right, in those places, and didn't feel like a minority and weren't necessarily, at least in some of the post World War II generations, or really post, let's say by the 80s and the 90s, American Jews especially really just made it as white people, and you see in the levels of assimilation and intermarriage, right, and all this stuff, and all of a sudden, so there's this really big confusion both within the Jewish community, outside the Jewish community, right? Are we in the DEI space? Are we a minority? Are we an other? And can you be an other when you are associated with power, when you have achieved power? Can you feel unstable and insecure if you have money and if you have political and cultural influence? How is it that you can be an other while you are associated with a very powerful nation state? And how can you be part of the DEI space when really you belong to a settler colonialist regime? Because you are not a minority, you are a white group with a European religion that took over the space of an indigenous group in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. So with all of that being said, I don't know if that was easy to digest and absorb. But at least for me, saying all that helps me to understand why Jews are so alienated in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. It makes lots of sense because of so much misunderstanding within our own community and outside of the community. And either it's unfortunate or it's fortunate, depending on how you look at it. But the Jews are a unique group, and they are all the only minority that really, on the one hand, has made it in a way, while on the other hand is always seen out on the outside. And I'll close with this. It is I don't know if it's the catch-22 or it is the hardest thing to deal with, I think, in what's like Western anti-Semitism, where the far left says you're not a people, you're part of the oppressive white class, and you don't deserve a country of their own, and you just got to stick it out here, and you don't get Israel, and I'm going to make you feel really bad if you have anything to do with Israel. And then you have the far right that says Jews are trying to replace us with Mexicans and refugees and Muslims. You don't belong here. Go back to where you came from.
And
We're
Benji, I have
stuck in the
one
middle of
more.
that.
I have one more thing to say. And this is something that I heard Kalev talking about on one of the podcasts, and it's something that Israel educators have discussed. When Jews die in small or large amounts, people have a moment of sadness and pause. People love dead Jews. The outpouring of love happens in that period. But if Jews fight back for their lives, for a state, if they refuse to accept that they'll be lambs to the slaughter, that's usually not as lovable. That's usually considered power hungry. And so, okay, I was wondering if someone was talking. So there's the phrase that's been made popular by the author Dara Horn, which is people love dead Jews, not necessarily meaning that they want to kill them, but that sympathy only pours out surrounding death or graveyard desecration. But living Jews actually trying to have sovereignty is much more uncomfortable. And that's something that's also happening now, and something that's in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space on universities. I see a lot of solidarity with dead Jews, and then there's a total quiet if there's some kind of organization to fight back. So I wanted to tag that on. Andrew, do you want to choose the next question?
Sure. Can I ask a question actually? So I'm going back and forth in my own head whether or not this everything that happened makes peace more attainable or less attainable. Because Joe Biden is now like really calling for this to be an impetus for peace. And I personally don't see a way out or a way Israel can exist without peace with the Palestinians at this point when this level of craziness is happening. But at the same time, the Israeli public, I'm sure, has an appetite against peace now because it was a horrible thing that happened. And how can you make peace with people who resort to this type of this level of violence? So I'm wondering what you think about that.
Right. Peace. Such a funny word.
You want
I
me
don't even know
to? You want me to go first, Benji?
I'd love for you to go. I mean, I have what to say, but I
I'm not
want
sure
your
I've got a
voice.
good answer, Andrew. I think.
But yeah, go.
Listen, I think firstly, when we say peace, we need to kind of define what that means. Without going to Jewishy for a moment, peace in Hebrew is shalom, the root of which is shalem, which means completeness. But peace in English, and kind of, so there's this kind of, prophetic idea of peace that a bit like France and Germany, who fought for hundreds of years. It's not an exaggeration to say millions of people were killed because of kind of French and German enmity. And now you couldn't even imagine those two kind of going to war. Peace in English comes from the word pax, like an agreement, which could be that, that me and you, we don't necessarily like each other. We've got an agreement, and it's an absence of violence, if you like. So I think first when we talk about peace, we need to try and understand what we're talking about. I would assume, and again, the world after October 7th is not the same world. I would assume that the appetite of Israelis to live anywhere near people they consider to be potentially genocidal, that appetite has gone down. I guess that's an understatement. And I think the argument that if you withdraw, land for peace, if you withdraw from land, you will get peace, where the best examples of withdrawing from land, one was in Gaza, where we got Hamas, where we got October the 7th, and one was in South Lebanon, where we withdrew and we got Hezbollah. And, please God, there shouldn't be a second front, but they've got 150,000 missiles. Israelis take that logic and they think our experiences withdrawing from land does not make us more safe, it makes us less safe. Having said all of that, in a scenario, which I don't know how achievable it is, but in a scenario where Israel does manage to achieve its military goals, it defeats Hamas, it destroys their commanders, etc. Not the ideology, but the commanders, the infrastructure, the military infrastructure, and the Gulf states, whether that's Qatar or maybe the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates who've got normalization agreement, get involved in Gaza, and some sort of thing happens, then maybe you could see some sort of, again, I think peace is maybe quite an ambitious word. Maybe you could see some sort of stability. But I would assume that October the 7th is going to undermine the argument that if only we withdrew from land, things would be better for us.
Thank you for that. Andrew, do you want to choose one more question? And again, people feel free to jump in, raise your hand. I see there's some debate going on in the chat as well. Okay. Is it Mia Marshall or Maya Marshall?
It's Maya. Hi.
Hi.
So I feel like addressing this paradigm shift that's happening in terms of like pre and post October 7th really has been the first time I feel like I can understand a little bit what I'm struggling with so much over the past couple of weeks. And I think there's a lot of Jews and Israelis that aren't really aware of that, right? Like those people who are, I guess, still living in that pre-October 7th reality. So they're kind of acting from that space or reacting from that space. And I guess I find myself in a position where I'm sort of struggling to navigate my own values, beliefs, and opinions in light of that shift. And like back to the topic of noise, I think all of that noise has sort of blocked me from being able to figure that out with myself and navigate what that means and what is it that I feel. And I guess my question is like, what do you see as the best way to try and figure that out? Like, what are the key facets and questions we should be considering and asking ourselves in order to kind of quiet that external noise and distill that in order to kind of become at one with understanding what it is that we actually feel?
Hey, Maya.
I felt like I felt like there was more of a statement in there, and I was really listening, and I think people are resonating with that. But do you also have a question?
I think I heard a question.
Heard a question. Okay, good.
Yeah.
It was a question. It was just impossible to answer. That was the problem.
No. No, it is a hard question. But the question is really how to navigate the noise so I can kind of figure out where I'm at and have some clarity, like where I'm emotionally, where I'm at ideologically, and like how do I just kind of like analyze this moving forward so I can actually breathe a little bit. That was the question I heard. Did I get it right? Right. So I analyze and how I can dialogue with people with a very simple barometer of there's a fool and a drunk. I can't talk to a fool. I can't talk to a drunk, nor can I really take anything they say or do seriously, and they cannot be in my space. And I got to remove myself from the fools and the drunks. So is the noise that you are engaging with or that we are seeing, can they be identified with a fool or a drunk? And if so, it's got to get the hell out of my way, right? There's no doubt about it. And it may be hard to then figure out, and I'm like, who's the fool and who's the drunk? Because someone who's not a fool or a drunk may say things that a fool or a drunk may say. And that's where it gets a little complex of if someone is, saying things that sound like that, but really they're actually reasonable folks that are, have emotional intelligence, have cognitive abilities to understand and critically think. I think it's worthwhile to be engaging and talking with those people to try and understand where we're at. And there could be some sensibility to their positions and to really hold that the ability to differentiate between what's simple and what's complex. To not use nuance as an excuse, but nuance to try and get to clarity. And that's just like, I just sounded super buzzwordy. So I'm going to try and explain that, which there's a super simplistic way of understanding this war and this conflict right now, and it is not so difficult. And the dehumanization of Israeli goals here and the dehumanization of Jews here, that's something simple to recognize, and that is not acceptable. While at the same time, the dehumanization, saying, well, you got to carpet bomb all of Gaza, right? There's 2.3 million people that live there, right? And I'm one who's advocating for Israeli military offensive, the airstrikes, and doing everything that is militarily we are able to do within our own ethics as Jews, as Israelis, and within how war should be fought as people who believe in our enlightened liberal order, if you want to call it that. We should not become Hamas. While I can also hold that innocents will die as a result of it, it is painful. And it is going to be painful for our side. And I am also dealing with the fact that I'm for an offensive, knowing I will have friends that may die as a result. And am I willing to argue for that, knowing that I was not a combat soldier in the army, and I was not called up to reserve duty, and I have so many friends with partners and kids who were called up, and most Israelis and most, I say, Zionists or Jews that are supportive of Israel, or non-Jews also supportive of Israel, when we're saying this is what we need to do, we also have to deal with that huge weight the pain that is going to cost for us to come on the other side. So there's a lot of human pain here, and we cannot avoid it. We also cannot dehumanize, and we cannot allow for the dehumanization of us, the Jews, and the dehumanization of Palestinians, while absolutely advocating for the eradication of genocidal jihadist Hamas. And you have to differentiate between Hamas and the people that they are oppressing and ruling over and forcing us to fight against, forcing us to kill innocents indirectly as a result of it, and forcing us to put our young people in harm's way. And our economy is going to, Israel will be dealing with this for a very long time. The fact that the heart of our workforce is not working. After the Yom Kippur War, Israel had 3 currencies, essentially because of the Yom Kippur War and the aftermath. I'm just like this. Everything we know about Israel and any layer of life is going to change forever, and it's all because of those Hamas genocidal acts. Right? And there's no doubt about it. And there's no justification of we deserve this or anything like that. So Maya, in terms of your kind of question on navigating the noise, can you identify people that recognize you and anyone else that supports the Jewish people as human? Right? The Jewish people as human, and also doesn't dehumanize anyone else, while still being able to see the simplicity of this is good versus evil, this is barbarism versus human civilization. And if Israel is not allowed to win this war against Hamas, Hamas's war is coming for the rest in the West.
Benji, every sentence that when you have a little talk piece, it ends beautifully. And I'm like, wow, that could be the end of this conversation. But it's not the end of this conversation, because this has 5 more parts. We're going to be this is the end for tonight. Andrew, I'll tell you when to stop recording, but I do have a couple of things to say. We are going to have 5 more in every week on Wednesday night. We realize Thursday's not good for young people, especially living in Israel, who want to relax and hang out in whatever way possible after the end of a long week. So this will switch to Wednesdays at 8 o'clock Israel time. And we're going to take a deeper dive next week. We've been touching on and talking about paradigm shift, but that's going to be the real focus. And I saw a lot of questions come up in the chat that didn't get answered. And I know there were email questions that didn't get answered. And something that, for me, in closure, that links navigating the noise to the paradigm shift is I am grappling with hearing the word and using the word evil, like pure evil, versus dehumanization. And that's something that is part of the paradigm shift. And it's also something that Benji is allowing us to look at a little bit more carefully, so we can start thinking about our own moral compass and navigating the noise. So we are going to keep all of the questions in the chat. This is a continuing conversation. So I hope that people that didn't get to speak or didn't get some of their difficult questions or interesting questions answered come back so we can actually address them live. one thing, and I'm just going to ask people to raise their little yellow hands. Do you know how to do that? I want to see here, who is an alum of Masa? I just want to get a quick snapshot. If you were on a Masa program and you finished it, raise your hand. Okay. I'm trying to see if this is the majority. Okay. Benji. Andrew, I guess you too.
Me too.
All right, but yeah. Okay, so it looks like a good, like 9 or 10 people. Now put your hands down. And now I want to see people who are currently a fellow. You're in a Masa program right now. I would like you to raise your hands. Okay. Okay. So it looks like a minority. Now put your hands down. And the last show of hands is for people who are not in a Masa program at all, but somehow heard about this and thought they'd like to show up and learn a little bit more. Well, there's probably somewhere there. Okay. The last thing I want to mention before we stop recording is that we discovered at Masa that there's some people who are really active on social media that are part of our community, and we don't know who they are. We're not communicating with each other. We don't have a strong network of support. And Andrew is going to drop in the chat a link to a group for people who are active in social media. And this is active in social media in terms of supporting Israel. I want to be transparent about that. There are definitely Masa alum who are active in social media and are critical of Israel, and that's absolutely acceptable. This particular group is to find grounding and community for people who are Israel advocates. So Andrew's going to put that in the chat, and we'll also put it on our, I think it already has gone out to our community emergency group, but anybody can also contact me individually if they want to learn more. I want to thank Benji so much for tonight. I found it really helpful, not only intellectually, but actually emotionally. Like, I feel like I have different tools to navigate my own noise in a way that I hadn't heard or articulated before. So I really thank you for that. And I look forward to seeing all of you. And we're going to expand this. We wanted to start with a small group, but we're going to broadcast that these webinars are going on to a larger network of our Masa ecosystem. You can always share the link with friends. It doesn't have to be people who are just part of Masa or alum. It can be anyone. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody next week, Wednesday. So, Andrew, if you want to stop recording now, you can. We'll say good night, and I'm staying here.